A billionaire mother walks into a five-star restaurant with her 8-year-old son. Across the room, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast sits with his daughter. Their eyes lock. And in that split second, Alara Monroe realizes 3 things that turn her blood to ice. 1. He knows exactly who she is. 2. He's been waiting for her. 3. The threatening emails, the sabotage deals, the money vanishing from her accounts. He knows about all of it, maybe even caused it. The question isn't if their worlds will collide tonight. They already have. The question is whether she walks out of this restaurant the same woman who walked in. Because what happens in the next 45 minutes will rewrite everything you think you know about power, protection, and the razor-thin line between enemy and savior. Have you ever felt someone's eyes on you and just known deep in your gut that your life was about to change? That's exactly where Alara is right now. She has 60 seconds to decide her next move. Walk toward her table and pretend she doesn't see him. Play it safe. Keep her son close. Get through dinner and leave. Or turn around. Grab her son's hand. Run. Because every instinct in her body is screaming that Salvatore De Luca doesn't just know who she is, he's been hunting her. But here's what she doesn't know yet. What none of us know yet. The man watching her from across the room, he's not her enemy. He's the only thing standing between her and complete destruction. And in exactly 7 minutes, when 2 masked men break into her penthouse to kidnap her son, Salvatore De Luca will crash through a window like an avenging angel and save both their lives. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, Alara is standing in the doorway of Aurelio's, the kind of restaurant where silence is a currency and discretion costs extra. Marble floors that swallow every footstep, crystal chandeliers bathing everything in warm amber light, the air thick with aged wine and truffle oil, white linen tablecloths, sterling silver catching candlelight. This is where empires come to negotiate, where fortunes change hands over rare steak and whispered promises. And tonight, 2 empires are about to collide. Alara pushes through the heavy oak doors, her son Evan's small hand wrapped tight in hers. She looks flawless on the surface, black Armani dress, diamond studs, hair swept into a perfect low bun. But underneath, 38 hours without real sleep, board meetings that bled into dawn, encrypted threats she couldn't trace, her billion-dollar tech empire hemorrhaging money, and someone has their hand on the wound, squeezing. Evan tugs her forward, excited, oblivious. She forces herself to smile. Just get through dinner. Be present. Breathe. That's when her eyes find him. And her heart stops. Corner table. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering skyline behind him. Salvatore De Luca. Even his name tastes like gunpowder. And those eyes cold, calculating, already fixed on her like she's prey that just wandered into his territory. He wasn't alone. A little girl sat beside him, maybe 9 years old, dark curls and innocent eyes. But his eyes promised violence. Alara had 2 choices: grab Evan and run, or walk toward her table and face whatever came next. What she didn't know? Both choices led to the same place. Stay close, because in the next 45 minutes, you're going to witness a story about a woman who made a deal with the devil to save everything she loved. And the devil who chose her over his empire. This is their story. Alara didn't move. Couldn't. Her feet felt welded to the marble floor. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, grab Evan, and get as far from Salvatore De Luca as physically possible. But running would confirm she knew who he was. Running would make her look guilty. Running would paint a target on her back if there wasn't one already. So she did what she'd been doing for the past 3 years since building Monroe Technologies, from a garage startup into a $2 billion empire. She swallowed the fear, locked her knees, lifted her chin, and walked forward like she owned the room. Because technically, she did. She'd bought a 20% stake in Aurelio's 2 years ago as an investment, The owner, Marco, treated her like family. This was her safe space, her escape. The one place in the city where she could take Evan and pretend, just for an hour, that she wasn't drowning. Evan was tugging her hand again, his voice bright with excitement. "Mom, can I get the pasta? The one with the butter sauce? Please?" She glanced down at him, 8 years old, brown eyes that mirrored hers, that gap-toothed smile that could melt her on her worst days. He had no idea how bad things had gotten. No idea that 3 of her biggest clients had pulled their contracts last month. No idea that her CFO had quit without explanation. No idea that someone was systematically dismantling everything she'd built, piece by piece, and she couldn't figure out who or why. "You can get whatever you want, baby," she said softly, squeezing his hand. They reached their usual table in the corner. Not the corner where Salvatore sat, thank God, but close enough that she could feel his presence, like heat from a fire. She helped Evan into his chair, her back deliberately turned to the mafia boss, and sat down across from her son. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "Focus on Evan. Just focus on Evan." "How was school today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Evan launched into a story about his science project, something about volcanoes and baking soda, his hands gesturing wildly. Normally, she'd hang on every word. Tonight, she heard maybe half of it. Her mind kept circling back to the man across the room. Salvatore De Luca wasn't just some low-level mobster. He was the kind of name whispered in boardrooms and courtrooms, the kind of man politicians denied knowing, the kind of power that operated outside the law because he was the law in certain circles. And he'd been watching her. Why? She'd never done business with anyone even remotely connected to organized crime. She'd built her company clean, every contract vetted, every partnership scrutinized. She didn't cut corners, didn't take dirty money, didn't play in the shadows. So why the hell was Salvatore De Luca sitting 50 feet away from her, staring at her like she was a problem he needed to solve? The waiter appeared. Young guy, probably mid-20s, with nervous energy and an eager smile. "Miss Monroe, wonderful to see you again. Can I start you with something to drink?" "Water for him," Alara said, nodding toward Evan. "And a glass of red wine for me. Whatever Marco recommends." "Of course. I'll be right back." The waiter disappeared. Evan was still talking, now about his best friend Tyler and some elaborate plan involving a treehouse. Alara nodded at the right moments, made the appropriate sounds, but her attention was fractured. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Salvatore was still watching. His daughter was coloring something on the table, completely absorbed, but he hadn't taken his eyes off Alara, not once. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She turned back to Evan, forcing a smile. "That sounds like a really cool treehouse, honey." This wasn't supposed to be her life. 3 years ago, she'd been a software engineer with a dream and a prototype. She'd pitched her AI-driven cybersecurity platform to 47 investors before anyone took her seriously. Built the company from nothing, fought her way into rooms full of men who looked at her like she was there to serve coffee. She'd earned every dollar, every contract, every shred of respect. And now, someone was taking it all away. The threats had started small, anonymous emails warning her to sell the company. Then her servers got hacked. Then clients started walking. Then her head of security quit with no explanation, just packed his desk and left. Last week, someone had broken into her penthouse. Nothing stolen, just a message left on her bathroom mirror in red lipstick. "Stop digging." She hadn't gone to the police. What would she tell them? That she had a feeling? That something was wrong? They'd tell her to hire better security. They wouldn't understand that this wasn't random. This was orchestrated, calculated. Someone wanted her company, and they were willing to destroy her to get it. She just didn't know who. Until tonight. Until she walked into Aurelio's and locked eyes with a man who could make people disappear with a phone call. But let's rewind. Just 15 minutes earlier, before Alara walked through those doors, Salvatore De Luca was already seated at his table with his daughter, Isabella. And if you thought Alara's entrance was calculated, his was a masterclass in control. Salvatore didn't walk into rooms. He claimed them. The moment he stepped through Aurelio's entrance, conversations dropped to whispers. Waiters straightened their posture. Even the sommelier, a man who'd served presidents and Hollywood royalty, felt his hands go cold. Because everyone in that room knew what Salvatore De Luca represented. Power without permission, consequences without courts, a man who'd built an empire on fear, loyalty, and blood. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked like armor. No tie, white shirt open at the collar, a single platinum watch on his left wrist that cost more than most people's houses. His hair was dark, streaked with just enough silver to make him look distinguished instead of old. 42 years old, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. And those eyes gray, cold, unreadable. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. But then there was Isabella. 9 years old, holding her father's hand like it was the safest place in the world. She wore a navy blue dress with white flowers embroidered on the hem, her dark curls bouncing as she skipped beside him. She had her father's eyes, but her mother's softness. While Salvatore surveyed the room like a predator, calculating threats, Isabella was pointing at the chandelier, whispering something about how it looked like frozen stars. "Papa, can we sit by the window?" she asked, tugging his hand. His expression didn't soften, but something in his posture shifted. "Whatever you want, principessa." They moved to the corner table, floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the city skyline glittering like a kingdom laid out before them. Salvatore pulled out Isabella's chair first, waited until she was settled, then sat across from her with his back to the wall. Old habit. Never sit with your back exposed. Always see the exits. Always know who's in the room. Isabella immediately pulled out her coloring book and a small pack of crayons from her bag. She started drawing something, her tongue poking out in concentration. Salvatore watched her for a moment, and for just a second, the hardness in his face cracked. This was his world. Not the empire, not the power. Her. "What are you drawing?" he asked quietly. "A dragon," Isabella said without looking up. "But a nice one. One that protects people instead of hurting them." Salvatore's jaw tightened. Protects people. If only she knew what her father really did to protect her. The men he'd buried, the deals he'd made, the lines he'd crossed that could never be uncrossed. But she didn't need to know that. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if he could help it. A waiter approached, nervous. "Mr. De Luca? Welcome back. Can I get you something to drink?" "Sparkling water for her, whiskey for me." "Neat." "Right away, sir." The waiter scurried off. Salvatore's gaze swept the restaurant again, cataloging faces, exits, potential problems. It was automatic now. 30 years in this life had wired his brain to see threats everywhere. And that's when he saw her. Alara Monroe, walking through the entrance with a little boy clutching her hand. He recognized her immediately. Not because they'd met, they hadn't, but because he'd been studying her for 3 weeks. Ever since his second-in-command, Vincent Rossi, had started moving against her company without Salvatore's approval. Ever since Salvatore realized Vincent was trying to position himself for a power play. Ever since Salvatore understood that Alara Monroe wasn't just some billionaire, she was the key to exposing Vincent's betrayal. So yes, he'd been waiting for her. Not here, not tonight. But fate had a sense of humor. Because there she was, walking into his world. And she had no idea that the man watching her from across the room was the only thing standing between her and complete destruction. Their eyes met. And Salvatore saw it, the recognition, the fear, the split-second calculation. She knew who he was. Good. Fear kept people sharp. But there was something else in her gaze, too. Something he hadn't expected. Defiance. Isabella tugged his sleeve. "Papa, why are you staring at that lady?" Salvatore blinked. pulled his attention back to his daughter. I'm not Principessa. But he was, and she'd felt it too. He could tell by the way her spine went rigid, the way her hand tightened on her son's. The game had just begun, and neither of them knew the rules yet. It happened because of the children. Of course it did. Kids don't care about danger or power dynamics or the weight of eye contact across a crowded room. They see another kid and think, potential friend. Isabella noticed Evan first. She'd looked up from her coloring book, scanning the restaurant with the casual curiosity of a 9-year-old, and her gaze landed on the boy sitting with his mother 2 tables away. He was close to her age, maybe a little younger. Brown hair, serious expression, fidgeting with his napkin like he was trying to fold it into something. Papa, Isabella whispered, tugging Salvatore's sleeve. That boy is trying to make an origami crane, like the ones we made last week. Salvatore followed her gaze. Evan, Alara's son. The kid had no idea his mother was 3 seconds away from a panic attack. He was just focused on folding paper, his tongue poking out in concentration the same way Isabella's did when she drew. That's nice, Principessa, Salvatore said, trying to redirect her attention. Why don't you finish your dragon? But Isabella was already pushing back her chair. I'm going to show him the easy way to do the wings. He's doing it wrong. Isabella, Salvatore started, but she was already moving, her little legs carrying her across the restaurant with the confidence of a child who'd never had a reason to fear strangers. Salvatore's jaw clenched. Every protective instinct screamed at him to stop her, but making a scene would draw more attention. And besides, he could see Alara out of the corner of his eye. She'd noticed Isabella approaching. Her entire body had gone rigid. Isabella stopped at Evan's table, smiling brightly. Hi, I'm Isabella. You're making a crane, right? I can show you how to do the wings if you want. Evan looked up, startled. Then his face broke into a shy smile. Yeah, I keep messing it up. My teacher showed us once, but I forgot the middle part. It's tricky, Isabella agreed, pulling out the chair next to him without asking. Here, watch. Alara's eyes went wide. She glanced at Salvatore, then back at Isabella, clearly trying to decide if this was innocent or a trap. Salvatore slowly stood from his table. If his daughter was going to breach the invisible line between them, he wasn't going to let her do it alone. He crossed the restaurant and measured steps. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The kind of walk that reminded everyone in the room he owned the space. When he reached Alara's table, he stopped a respectful distance away, hands visible, posture relaxed but controlled. I apologize, he said, his voice low and even. My daughter has no concept of personal space. Alara stared at him. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, but also something else. Intelligence, assessment. She was measuring him the same way he was measuring her. It's fine, she said quietly, her voice steadier than he expected. Evan loves origami. He'll talk about paper cranes for an hour if you let him. Salvatore's gaze flicked to the boy. Evan was already absorbed in Isabella's demonstration, nodding along as she explained the folds. There was something pure about it. 2 kids who didn't know their parents were on opposite sides of an invisible war, just sharing a moment over folded paper. Your son, Salvatore said carefully. He seems like a good kid. He is, Alara replied, her eyes never leaving Salvatore's face. The best. Silence stretched between them, heavy, loaded. There was so much neither of them was saying. So many questions hovering in the air. Why are you here? What do you want? Do you know what's happening to my company? Are you the one destroying me? But neither spoke. Not yet. This wasn't the place. Not with the children right there. Not with half the restaurant pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. Salvatore broke the silence first. I'm Salvatore. I know who you are, Alara said flatly. His mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. Then you have me at a disadvantage. Because I don't know you. Liar. They both knew he was lying. But the game required pretense. "Alara Monroe," she said, extending her hand. He took it. Her grip was firm, confident, despite the fear he could see swimming beneath the surface. Her hand was smaller than his, but she didn't flinch when his fingers closed around hers. He held it a beat longer than necessary, long enough to feel her pulse hammering against his palm. "A pleasure," he said, releasing her hand. "Is it?" she asked, and there was an edge to her voice now. Challenge, defiance. He liked that. Most people wilted under his gaze. She was holding her ground. "Papa, look," Isabella called out, holding up a perfect origami crane. "Evan got it. I told you he just needed to see the wing part." Salvatore glanced at the children, then back at Alara. "Perhaps we should let them finish their lesson, and perhaps you and I should have a conversation." Alara's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About why someone's trying to destroy your company," Salvatore said quietly, "and why I'm the only one who can stop it." Her breath caught, just for a second, but he saw it. The confirmation that she knew something was wrong, that she'd been fighting shadows and losing. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Salvatore's gaze hardened. "Because the man doing it works for me, and I don't tolerate betrayal." Alara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Because Salvatore De Luca, the mafia boss who'd been watching her like a predator, had just admitted that someone in his organization was sabotaging her company. Which meant one of two things. Either he was telling the truth and offering help, or he was playing her, setting up the final move before he destroyed her completely. She couldn't tell which, and that terrified her. To understand why Alara was sitting in that restaurant, terrified but refusing to run, you need to understand where she came from. Because billionaires aren't born, they're forged, and Alara Monroe had been through fire. 10 years ago, she was nobody. A 26-year-old software engineer working 70-hour weeks at a tech startup that went belly up 3 months after she joined. She had a tiny apartment in Queens, student loan debt that made her nauseous, and dreams that felt too big for her bank account. But Alara had something most people didn't: vision. She saw patterns in data that other people missed. She understood that cybersecurity wasn't just about building walls, it was about predicting attacks before they happened. So she started building an AI platform in her spare time. Nights, weekends, any moment she wasn't at her day job. She called it Sentinel, an adaptive security system that learned from attempted breaches and evolved in real time. She pitched it to 47 venture capital firms, 47 rejections. Most of them didn't even let her finish the presentation. A few were polite, most were condescending. One investor actually laughed and asked if she'd considered finding a male co-founder to handle the business side. She went home that night and cried for 2 hours. Then she got up, revised her pitch, and kept going. Investor number 48 said yes, a woman named Catherine Wolfe, who'd made her fortune in biotech. She gave Alara $2 million, a handshake, and one piece of advice: don't let anyone convince you to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. Alara built Monroe Technologies in 18 months. Her first major client was a bank that had just suffered a massive data breach. Sentinel stopped the next attack cold. Word spread. More clients came. Defense contractors, healthcare networks, Fortune 500 companies who couldn't afford another security failure. Within 3 years, Monroe Technologies was valued at $2 billion. But success came with casualties. She'd been married once to Brandon, a finance guy who'd resented her success more than he'd celebrated it. When she got pregnant with Evan, he demanded she step back from the company. "You can't run a billion-dollar startup and be a mom," he'd said. She told him women did it every day. He told her she was being selfish. Evan was 6 months old when she found out about the affair. Brandon fought for custody, claimed she was an unfit mother because of her work schedule. The judge sided with Alara. Brandon moved to California with his new girlfriend and stopped returning Evan's calls. So Alara became a single mother, running a company that was growing faster than she could control. She showed up to every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game she could make, every bedtime she wasn't stuck on a conference call. She read Evan's stories about dragons and knights, and sometimes she wondered if she was the dragon or the knight in her own story. By the time Evan turned 7, Monroe Technologies was worth $2 billion. Alara had a penthouse in Manhattan, a garage full of cars she didn't have time to drive, and a loneliness that sat next to her at dinner and slept on the other side of the bed. She had employees, not friends, business partners, not confidants. People wanted things from her: contracts, investments, advice, access, but nobody just wanted her. And then 3 months ago, everything started falling apart. The threats, the sabotage, the feeling that someone was dismantling her empire piece by piece. She'd hired private investigators, upgraded her security, moved Evan to a private school with tighter protocols, but nothing stopped the attacks. She was exhausted, terrified, running on adrenaline and expensive coffee. And tonight, she just wanted one normal evening with her son. 1 hour where she could pretend the world wasn't collapsing. Instead, she walked into a restaurant and locked eyes with the most dangerous man on the East Coast. Salvatore De Luca wasn't born into power. He was born into survival. And there's a difference. His father, Giovanni De Luca, ran a small crew in South Brooklyn. Low-level work protection, rackets, loan sharking, the occasional hijacked truck. Nothing glamorous. Giovanni was mean when he was sober and worse when he wasn't. Salvatore's mother, Sophia, was a saint married to a devil, and she paid for it with bruises she covered with makeup and excuses. Salvatore was the oldest of 3 boys. He learned early that the world didn't care about fairness. It cared about strength, so he got strong. Physically first boxing at a gym his uncle ran, learning to take a hit and give one back twice as hard. But strength wasn't just muscle. It was knowing when to fight and when to wait, when to speak and when silence said more. His father died when Salvatore was 19. Heart attack, supposedly. Though rumors said it was poison from a rival crew settling old debts. Salvatore didn't cry at the funeral. He'd stopped crying years earlier. Instead, he made a decision. He wasn't going to be like his father, small-time, expendable, forgotten. He was going to build something that lasted. He started by consolidating his father's crew. Some men resisted. Those men disappeared. Salvatore didn't enjoy violence, but he understood its utility. Fear was a language everyone spoke. Within 2 years, he'd expanded from South Brooklyn into Manhattan. Within 5, he controlled shipping routes, construction contracts, and half the judges in the tri-state area. But he wasn't reckless. That's what separated him from the others. He moved like a businessman, not a thug. Invested in legitimate enterprises, restaurants, real estate, tech startups. Laundered money so clean it sparkled. Paid his taxes. Donated to charities. Became the kind of man politicians photographed with at fundraisers. By 30, Salvatore De Luca was untouchable. And then he met Lucia. She was a violinist, played at a concert hall his mother loved. That night, watching Lucia play, something in him cracked open. She was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't just that. It was the way she played, like the music hurt her, but she couldn't stop. She didn't know who he was. Didn't care about power or money or fear. She cared about Beethoven and whether the acoustics in the hall were adequate. He fell in love with her in 6 weeks, married her in 3 months. Isabella was born a year later. Dark curls like her mother, gray eyes like her father. The day Lucia placed that baby in his arms, Salvatore understood vulnerability for the first time. This tiny human depended on him completely, and he'd built his empire on violence and fear. For 4 years, he tried to balance both worlds. Came home every night to read Isabella bedtime stories. Taught her to count in Italian. Watched her dance around the living room to Lucia's violin. But the life he'd built didn't allow for balance. It demanded everything. Lucia died when Isabella was 4. Car accident. Brakes failed on a mountain road upstate. Salvatore wasn't with them. He'd stayed in the city for a meeting he thought couldn't wait. Lucia's car went off a cliff. She died instantly. Isabella survived with a broken arm and nightmares that lasted years. The official report said mechanical failure. Salvatore knew better. Someone had cut the brake lines. He spent 6 months hunting the man responsible. When he found him, he didn't kill him quickly. After Lucia, something in Salvatore went dark, cold. He'd loved once, and it had cost him everything. So he stopped loving. Stopped feeling much of anything except the sharp, clean focus of control. He expanded his empire, eliminated rivals, built walls so high nobody could touch him. Except Isabella. She was the crack in his armor. The one thing that could still make him feel. He hired bodyguards, drivers, security teams. Made sure she was never alone, never vulnerable, never at risk. He couldn't bring back her mother, but he could make damn sure nobody ever hurt her again. He never remarried, never even came close. There wasn't much of him left to give, just a shell built around a little girl who drew dragons and believed her father was a hero. He let her believe it. Better that than the truth. So, when he sat in Aurelio's that night, watching Isabella color while his world teetered on the edge of betrayal, he wasn't thinking about empires or power. He was thinking about how to protect the one thing he had left to lose. And then, Alara Monroe walked through the door, and everything got complicated. Alara felt the floor tilt beneath her, or maybe it was just her brain short-circuiting. Because Salvatore De Luca, the mafia boss who'd been watching her like a predator, had just admitted that someone in his organization was sabotaging her company. Which meant one of two things. Either he was telling the truth and offering help, or he was playing her, setting up the final move before he destroyed her completely. She couldn't tell which, and that terrified her. "I don't understand," she said slowly, keeping her voice low so Evan wouldn't hear. "If someone working for you is attacking my company, why wouldn't you just let it happen?" Salvatore's expression didn't change. Cold. Unreadable. "Because I didn't authorize it. And in my world, unauthorized actions are a problem." "Your world," Alara repeated, the words bitter on her tongue. "You mean organized crime." "I mean business," Salvatore corrected. "I don't care what you call it. The point is, someone's moving against you to position themselves against me. You're collateral damage. And I don't like collateral damage." Alara's hands curled into fists under the table. "So you're saying I'm just caught in the middle of some mafia power struggle? That my entire company, everything I've built, is being destroyed because of your internal politics?" "Yes." The bluntness of it hit her like a slap. No sugarcoating, no apologies, just cold, hard fact. "Who?" she demanded. "Who's doing it?" Salvatore's jaw tightened. "Not here. Not now. But if you want to save your company, you'll meet with me. Tomorrow. I'll send you an address." "And if I don't?" His gaze sharpened. "Then whoever's sabotaging you will finish the job. Your clients will keep leaving. Your systems will keep getting breached. And in 6 months, Monroe Technologies will be a cautionary tale about what happens when you're not protected." "Protected?" The word made her stomach turn. "You mean when I don't pay protection money to criminals?" "I mean, when you operate in a world where power decides outcomes, and you refuse to acknowledge that power exists," Salvatore said evenly. "You built your company clean. I respect that. But clean doesn't mean safe. And right now, you're anything but safe." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to go to hell, that she didn't need his help, that she'd handle her problems herself. But the truth was sitting heavy in her chest. She was losing, badly, and she didn't know how to fight an enemy she couldn't see. "Mama," Evan's voice cut through her thoughts. "Look, Isabella taught me how to do the wings." Alara forced herself to smile, to turn her attention to her son holding up a slightly lopsided paper crane. "That's beautiful, baby. Great job." Evan beamed. Then he turned to Isabella. "Do you want to try making a frog next? They're harder, but they can jump." Isabella's eyes lit up. "Yes, Papa." Can I stay a little longer, please? Salvatore's expression softened barely, but Alara saw it. The shift from mafia boss to father. 5 more minutes, Principessa. Then we need to go. Isabella nodded eagerly and turned back to Evan, already chattering about origami frogs. The two kids were completely absorbed in their project, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. Alara looked back at Salvatore. He was watching his daughter with something that almost looked like tenderness, and for just a second, she saw past the danger, past the cold calculation. She saw a father who loved his child, who'd probably do anything to protect her. Just like Alara would do anything to protect Evan. Maybe that's why she said what she said next. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just exhaustion, finally breaking her down. If I meet with you, Alara said quietly, how do I know you won't make things worse? How do I know this isn't just another way to destroy me? Salvatore met her gaze. You don't. But right now, I'm the only option you have. So, the real question is, do you trust me enough to take the risk? Or do you trust yourself enough to survive without me? Alara didn't answer, because she didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she had a feeling she was about to find out. The waiter arrived with their meals, breaking the moment. Salvatore stepped back from the table, his presence still looming but no longer directly threatening. He returned to his corner with Isabella, who waved goodbye to Evan before skipping back to her father. Evan waved back, grinning, completely unaware that he'd just made friends with the daughter of the most dangerous man on the East Coast. Alara barely tasted her food. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what Salvatore had just told her. Someone in his organization. Unauthorized action. Internal power struggle. It should have felt like paranoia, like conspiracy theory nonsense. But it didn't, because it explained everything. The precision of the attacks. The way her security kept failing despite upgrades. The fact that every move she made seemed to be anticipated before she even made it. Whoever was after her had resources, connections, inside information. That kind of operation didn't come from some random hacker or disgruntled competitor. It came from organized crime. But who and why? Alara pulled out her phone, keeping it under the table so Evan wouldn't notice. She opened her encrypted messaging app and scrolled through the threatening emails she'd received over the past 3 months. Most were generic, vague warnings to sell the company. But one stood out. She'd almost forgotten about it because it came through her personal email instead of her work account. Someone had sent her a photograph. Just a photograph, no message. It showed her standing outside her office building, talking on her phone. The angle suggested it was taken from across the street. The timestamp was 3 weeks ago. She zoomed in on the image. In the background, barely visible, was a black SUV. And on the side of that SUV, partially obscured but readable if you looked closely enough, was a company name, Rossi Logistics. Her blood went cold. She'd seen that name before. Rossi Logistics handled shipping for several of her clients. They had contracts with 2 of her biggest accounts. And now that she thought about it, both of those clients had pulled their contracts within days of each other. Coincidence or coordination? She quickly opened a new browser tab and searched for Rossi Logistics. The company website was sleek, professional, nothing obviously suspicious. CEO listed as Vincent Rossi. She clicked on his bio. 48 years old, 25 years in logistics and supply chain management, board member of several trade organizations, philanthropist, donated to children's hospitals and veterans charities. And then, buried in a fluff piece from a business journal 3 years ago, she found it. A single line in a profile about New York's most influential business leaders. Rossi credits his success to strong partnerships and learning from the best, including his early mentor, Salvatore De Luca. Mentor, partnership. The words were careful, coded, but Alara understood what they meant. Vincent Rossi worked for Salvatore, or at least, he had. And if Salvatore was telling the truth about unauthorized actions, then Vincent had gone rogue. Her hands were shaking. She set the phone down and forced herself to breathe. Think. If Vincent Rossi was behind the sabotage, then he had access to her client networks through his logistics company. He could intercept shipments, delay deliveries, create problems that made her look incompetent. He could feed information to hackers, telling them exactly when and where to strike. He could pressure clients to drop their contracts by threatening their own supply chains. And he could do all of it while looking like a legitimate businessman. No obvious connection to organized crime. No fingerprints. Just a series of unfortunate business failures that happened to destroy Alara's company. But why? Why target her specifically? The answer hit her like a freight train. 3 months ago, she'd signed a contract with the Department of Defense, a massive deal to provide cybersecurity for military installations and defense contractors. It was the biggest contract of her career, worth $800 million over 5 years. It had put Monroe Technologies on a completely different level. But it had also put her in competition with other security firms, including one that Vincent Rossi had invested in heavily, a company called Titan Security. She remembered now they'd been the runner-up for the DoD contract. They'd lost by a narrow margin, and their stock had tanked when the news went public. If Vincent could destroy Monroe Technologies, force her to sell, and then acquire her tech and client list, he could repackage it under Titan Security. He could go back to the DoD and say, "Look, we've acquired the winning company's technology. Give us the contract instead." And he'd make billions. It wasn't about her. It was never about her. She was just an obstacle, a piece on a board Vincent was trying to control. And Salvatore knew. He'd figured it out. That's why he was here. Not to help her out of kindness. Men like him didn't do kindness, but because Vincent's move against her was also a move against him. A play for independence. A challenge to Salvatore's authority. Alara looked across the restaurant. Salvatore was cutting Isabella's pasta into smaller pieces, his movements careful and precise. He glanced up, caught Alara staring, and held her gaze. There was a question in his eyes. A test. "Do you understand now? Do you see the game?" She did. God help her, she did. Alara waited until Evan finished his pasta. Waited until he was absorbed in folding another origami creation. This time, a boat. Then she stood, her legs unsteady, and walked across the restaurant toward Salvatore's table. Every step felt like walking toward a ledge, but she'd made her decision. Salvatore watched her approach. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "We need to talk," Alara said quietly when she reached his table. "Privately." Salvatore glanced at Isabella, who was still coloring. Then he nodded. "There's a private dining room in the back. Marco won't mind if we use it for a few minutes." He stood, signaled to one of the waiters, and within seconds they were being led down a hallway to a small room with a single table and chairs. The door closed behind them, muffling the sounds of the restaurant. Suddenly, it was just the two of them. No children, no witnesses, no buffer. Alara crossed her arms, holding herself together by force of will. "Vincent Rossi! That's who's sabotaging me, isn't it?" Salvatore's expression didn't change. "Yes. And you've known for how long?" 3 weeks. Fury flared hot in her chest. 3 weeks? You've known for 3 weeks that your guy was destroying my company, and you did nothing? "I did plenty," Salvatore said calmly. "I investigated, gathered evidence, confirmed my suspicions. You think I move without proof? I think you let me suffer while you played detective," Alara shot back. "My company is bleeding out, and you sat there watching it happen. Your company was already compromised before I knew about it," Salvatore said, his voice hard now. "Vincent started moving against you 4 months ago. By the time I noticed the pattern, the damage was done. So don't lecture me about timing." Alara's jaw clenched. "Why didn't you stop him?" "Because stopping him means exposing him, and exposing him means revealing connections I'm not ready to reveal. Vincent has his hands in a lot of places, legitimate businesses, political contacts. If I move against him openly, I burn bridges I've spent 20 years building." "So I'm just collateral damage," Alara said bitterly. You can't stop him because it's inconvenient for you. Salvatore's eyes went cold. You think this is about convenience? Vincent's making a play for my entire operation. He's recruiting my people, siphoning my money, positioning himself to take over. Your company is just the first domino. If he succeeds with you, he'll move against me next. So no, miss. Monroe, this isn't about convenience. It's about survival. Mine and yours. The raw honesty of it stunned her into silence, because he was right. They were both targets, both fighting the same enemy. And whether she liked it or not, their fates were tangled together now. What do you want from me? She asked finally. I want you to trust me long enough for us both to survive this. Salvatore said, I can protect your company. I can give you security, information, resources, but I need something in return. Of course you do, Alara muttered. What? Access to your systems, Salvatore said. Vincent's been using your tech against you, but he doesn't know I know about it. If you give me access to your network, I can trace his movements, figure out who else he's working with, build a case that destroys him without blowing back on me. Alara stared at him. You want me to let a mafia boss hack into my cybersecurity company? I want you to let an ally help you catch a traitor, Salvatore corrected. And before you say no, think about what happens if you don't. Vincent wins. He takes your company, your reputation, maybe even your life if he decides you're a loose end. You lose everything. Is your pride worth that? She wanted to say yes, wanted to tell him to go to hell, that she'd fight her own battles. But she couldn't, because he was right. She was losing, and she didn't know how to win alone. If I do this, Alara said slowly, I need guarantees. I need to know you're not going to use my tech for whatever criminal enterprise you're running. I need to know Evan stays safe. And I need to know that when this is over, you walk away from my life and never come back. Salvatore studied her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. You have my word. Alara looked at his hand. This was it. The moment she either walked away and faced Vincent alone, or she made a deal with the devil and hoped she survived. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, surprisingly gentle. Then we have an agreement, Salvatore said quietly. Alara nodded, but as she pulled her hand away, one thought echoed through her mind. I just made a deal with a monster, and I don't know if I'll ever get free. That night, after she tucked Evan into bed and read him 2 chapters of his favorite book, Alara sat in her home office staring at her laptop. The cursor blinked on her encrypted messaging system. All she had to do was grant access. Create a backdoor for Salvatore's people to enter her network. Let a criminal organization into the most secure systems she'd ever built. Everything in her screamed against it. She'd built Monroe Technologies on integrity, on the promise that her systems were impenetrable, trustworthy, clean. And now she was about to compromise that for a man she'd met 3 hours ago. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Once she did this, there was no going back. Salvatore would have access to everything: client data, government contracts, proprietary algorithms worth hundreds of millions. If he wanted to betray her, he could destroy her faster than Vincent ever could. She typed in the access codes, created the back door, encrypted it with a key only Salvatore would have. And then she hit send before she could change her mind. Her phone rang immediately. Salvatore's voice, low and controlled. You made the right choice. Did I? Alara asked, her voice hollow. You're still alive. Your son's still safe. That's what matters. What happens now? Now I send my people into your systems. They'll trace Vincent's intrusions back to the source. It'll take time, maybe a week, but we'll find everyone he's working with. And then we'll dismantle his operation piece by piece. And then? Silence on the other end, long enough that Alara wondered if he'd hung up. Then you get your company back, and I get my empire back, and we both walk away from this alive. What about Vincent? What about him? Salvatore's voice had gone cold. Dead. Alara understood what he wasn't saying. Vincent wouldn't walk away from anything, ever again. "I don't want to know," she said quietly. "Whatever you do to him, I don't want to know." "Good," Salvatore said, "because I wasn't going to tell you anyway." He hung up. Alara sat in the dark of her office, staring at her laptop screen, at the back door she'd just opened, and she wondered if she'd just saved herself or signed her own death warrant. 2 days passed. 2 days of Alara going through the motions, board meetings, client calls, pretending everything was fine while Salvatore's people worked invisible in her systems. She'd met with him once more, at a Brooklyn address he'd sent, a warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside but was pristine inside. He'd shown her the evidence his team had gathered. Vincent's digital fingerprints all over her breaches, names of people he'd recruited, money trails that led back to Titan security. It was all there, proof that she'd been right to trust Salvatore, or at least proof that he was telling the truth about Vincent. She'd left that meeting feeling something close to hope. Maybe she could survive this. Maybe her company wasn't finished. Maybe making a deal with a mafia boss was the smartest thing she'd ever done. That feeling lasted exactly 36 hours. Alara was in Evan's room, helping him with homework, when the power cut out. The sudden darkness made Evan yelp, but Alara's instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't a regular blackout. The backup generator should have engaged within seconds. It didn't. "Evan, under the bed. Now." Her voice was calm but firm. "Mom, what?" "Now, baby. Quiet as you can." He scrambled under the bed, and Alara moved to the door. Her heart was hammering, but her mind was clear. She'd installed panic buttons throughout the penthouse after the first threats. One was in Evan's room, hidden behind a light switch plate. She pressed it, heard the silent alarm activate, and then grabbed the baseball bat she kept in Evan's closet. Footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Multiple people. Not her security team. She knew their patterns, their weights. These were intruders. The door exploded inward. 2 men, masks covering their faces, guns drawn. Alara swung the bat at the first one's knee. Connected hard. He went down screaming. The second man grabbed her wrist, twisted, and the bat clattered to the floor. She drove her elbow into his ribs, remembered every self-defense class she'd taken, fought like her son's life depended on it. Because it did. The man hit her, hard. Her head snapped back and she tasted blood. He shoved her against the wall, gun pressed to her temple. "Where's the kid?" She didn't answer, didn't even look toward the bed. The man hit her again, this time in the stomach. She doubled over, gasping, vision blurring. The first man was getting up, limping, furious. He pulled out a knife. "Check the closet," he told his partner. "I'll handle her." That's when the window shattered. Glass exploded inward, and a figure came through like something from a nightmare. Dark clothes, fast, brutal. Salvatore De Luca moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently. The man with the knife didn't even have time to turn before Salvatore's fist connected with his jaw. The sound of bone breaking was loud in the small room. The second man raised his gun, but Salvatore was faster. Disarmed him in 2 moves, drove him to the ground, and had a knee on his throat before Alara could even process what was happening. 2 more men came through the door, Salvatore's people securing the room, checking corners. "Clear," one of them said. Salvatore looked up, his eyes finding Alara's. "Are you hurt?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe, just shook her head. "Evan?" Salvatore asked. "Under the bed," Alara managed to whisper. Salvatore stood, moved to the bed, crouched down. "Evan, it's Mr. De Luca, from the restaurant. You're safe now. Can you come out?" A pause. Then Evan's tear-streaked face appeared from under the bed. He was shaking, terrified, but when he saw Salvatore, he crawled out. Salvatore picked him up, this 8-year-old boy he barely knew, and held him while Evan sobbed into his shoulder. "You're okay," Salvatore said quietly. "You're safe. I promise." Alara's knees gave out. She slid down the wall, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Salvatore handed Evan to one of his men. "Take him to Isabella. She's downstairs with Maria. Keep them together." And then he was kneeling in front of Alara, his hands on her face, checking her injuries. "Look at me," he said, his voice firm but not harsh. "Alara, look at me." She forced her eyes to focus on his face. There was blood on his knuckles. His expression was controlled, but she could see the fury beneath it. Cold, lethal. "We need to move," he said. "Vincent knows I'm protecting you." This was his response. "He'll send more." "My home," Alara whispered. "He was in my home." "Not anymore," Salvatore said. "My people are securing the building. But you can't stay here. Pack essentials. 5 minutes. You and Evan are coming with me." "Where?" "Somewhere Vincent can't reach you." He stood, pulled her to her feet. 5 minutes, Alara. Then we go." She nodded, moving on autopilot. Grabbed a bag, threw in clothes, Evan's medication, his favorite stuffed dragon. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip the bag. Salvatore took it from her, his hand steadying hers for just a moment. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I won't let him touch you again." Alara looked up at him. This man who'd just killed or nearly killed 2 people in her son's bedroom. This man who'd come through a window like a dark angel when she'd needed saving most. This man who terrified her and protected her in equal measure. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you come?" Salvatore's jaw tightened. "Because the panic alarm you triggered goes directly to my phone. Because I promised to protect you, and because I don't break my promises." He turned and walked out, and Alara followed, her world tilting into something she didn't recognize anymore. Something where mafia bosses saved her life, where violence was protection, where the monster was the hero. And she didn't know if that made her safe or damned. Salvatore's safe house wasn't what Alara expected. She'd imagined something cold, industrial, maybe a warehouse with armed guards and concrete walls. Instead, it was a townhouse in Brooklyn. Old brownstone, ivy climbing the facade, a garden in the back where someone clearly tended to flowers and herbs. Inside, hardwood floors and soft lighting and furniture that looked lived in rather than staged. "This is where you live?" Alara asked as Salvatore carried her bag inside. "One of the places," he said. "Isabella likes this one best. Says it feels like a real home." Evan had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from fear and tears. Salvatore carried him upstairs to a guest room where Isabella was already asleep in the bed next to it. The little girl had insisted Evan stay close to her when Salvatore's people brought him earlier. "So he won't be scared," she'd said. Alara stood in the doorway, watching Salvatore lay Evan down carefully, removing his shoes, pulling a blanket over him. The tenderness in the gesture made her chest ache. Downstairs, Salvatore poured her a glass of whiskey. She didn't usually drink hard liquor, but tonight she drained it in 2 swallows. The burn felt good, grounding. "Vincent's escalating," Salvatore said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "This wasn't just intimidation. He sent those men to take Evan. Use him as leverage against you and against me." Alara's hands clenched around the empty glass. "How did you know? How did you get there so fast?" "I've had people watching your building since the night we met at Aurelio's. When the panic alarm went off, I was 12 minutes away. Got there in 7. 7 minutes. If he'd been any slower, if traffic had been worse, if he'd hesitated, she couldn't finish the thought. Didn't want to imagine what would have happened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Salvatore's expression didn't soften. "Don't thank me. This is my fault. Vincent's moving against you to hurt me. You're in danger because of me." "I was in danger before I met you," Alara countered. "At least now I know who the enemy is." "Do you?" Salvatore asked, his gaze sharp. "Because Vincent's not acting alone. Someone's feeding him information. Someone close to both of us." The implication hung in the air. A traitor. Someone in Salvatore's organization or someone in Alara's company. Maybe both. Over the next 3 days, a routine formed. Alara worked from the safe house, laptops set up in the dining room, taking encrypted calls with her team. Salvatore's people had secured her systems even tighter now. No more breaches, no more sabotage. But the damage was done. Clients were still skittish. Investors were asking questions. Evan and Isabella became inseparable. They built blanket forts in the living room, played board games, taught each other songs and jokes. Isabella showed Evan her garden, let him help water the tomatoes and basil. Evan taught Isabella card tricks he'd learned from a YouTube video. They were just kids, finding normalcy in chaos. And slowly, carefully, Alara and Salvatore began talking. Real conversations, not just tactical planning. Late at night after the children were asleep, they'd sit in the kitchen with coffee or wine, and the walls would crack just slightly. Salvatore told her about growing up in Brooklyn, about his father's brutality and his mother's quiet strength, about the first time he realized power was the only language some people understood. Alara told him about building Monroe Technologies, about the investors who dismissed her, about Brandon's betrayal and the loneliness of success. "Do you regret it?" Salvatore asked one night. "Building the company? Giving up a normal life? Do you regret your choices?" Alara countered. He smiled, just slightly. "Every day. But I'd make them again." "Then you have your answer." Something shifted between them in those late-night conversations. Recognition, maybe. Two people who'd sacrificed everything for power and protection, who'd built empires on will alone, who understood that strength and loneliness often walked hand in hand. Alara caught herself watching him with Evan and Isabella, the way he refereed their games with mock seriousness, the way he let Isabella braid his hair while he reviewed security reports, the way he cut Evan's food without being asked, remembering he didn't like his vegetables touching his pasta. This was the man people feared, the man who'd killed without hesitation to protect her. And yet here he was, reading bedtime stories in different voices and making sure the nightlight was on because Isabella was afraid of the dark. Who was the real Salvatore? The killer or the father? Or somehow, impossibly, both? One afternoon, Isabella came downstairs holding a photograph in a silver frame. She showed it to Evan, her voice soft and careful. "This was my mama," she said. "Her name was Lucia." Alara looked up from her laptop. The woman in the photograph was beautiful. Dark hair, warm eyes, holding a violin. She was laughing at whoever was behind the camera, caught in a moment of pure joy. "She's pretty," Evan said. "Where is she now?" "She died when I was little," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "A car accident. Papa doesn't like to talk about it." Alara's chest tightened. She glanced toward the hallway where Salvatore was on a call, his voice low and controlled. When he finished and came back into the kitchen, he stopped short seeing Isabella with the photograph. "Principessa, where did you find that?" "My room," Isabella said. "I was showing Evan. Is that okay?" Salvatore's expression was unreadable. "Of course. But it's almost time for your piano lesson. Miss Chen is waiting upstairs." Isabella nodded, carefully placed the photograph on the table, and skipped upstairs with Evan following. Once they were gone, silence filled the kitchen. Salvatore picked up the photograph, his thumb brushing over the glass. "Her name was Lucia," he said quietly, even though Alara hadn't asked. And then, in the quiet of that kitchen, with afternoon lights streaming through the windows, Salvatore told her everything. About meeting Lucia at a concert, about falling in love, about 4 years of trying to balance two worlds, about the car accident that took everything from him. "Someone cut the brake lines," he said, his voice hollow. "I was supposed to go with them that weekend. Stayed behind for a meeting I thought couldn't wait." Lucia died instantly. Isabella survived with a broken arm and nightmares that lasted 2 years. His jaw tightened. "I spent 6 months finding the man who did it, and I made sure he understood what he'd taken from me before I ended him." He set the photograph down carefully. "After Lucia died, I became someone else. Colder, more controlled. I built walls so high nothing could touch me. The only exception was Isabella. She's the only soft part of me left. Everything else is just survival. Alara saw it, then the weight he carried. The guilt of surviving when Lucia hadn't. The impossible balance of being a father in a world that demanded ruthlessness. The loneliness of loving someone so much you destroy anything that threatened them. "Is that why you helped me?" Alara asked. "Because you saw yourself?" Salvatore met her eyes. "I helped you because Vincent crossed a line, but I stayed because I saw something in you that reminded me of Lucia. The refusal to compromise. The way you fight for what matters. The way you look at Evan like he's your whole world. Lucia used to look at Isabella the same way." "I'm not her," Alara said gently. "I know," Salvatore said. "You're you, and that's enough." Something passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. The beginning of something neither of them were ready to name, but both felt growing. "She would have liked you," Salvatore said quietly. "Lucia. She always said I needed someone who'd challenge me. Someone who wouldn't let me hide behind walls." Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away, just sat there, holding her hand, grieving a woman he'd lost years ago while beginning to feel something for the woman sitting across from him. And for the first time since the attack, Alara felt something other than fear. She felt understood. It hit her 3 nights later. She was lying in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, when the truth crashed through her defenses like a wrecking ball. She was falling for him. For Salvatore De Luca, the mafia boss, the killer, the man who lived in a world of violence and control. It was the most reckless, impossible, terrifying thing she'd ever felt. Because this wasn't infatuation. It wasn't gratitude for him saving her life or protecting Evan. It was something deeper. Something that had been building every time she watched him with Isabella and Evan. Every late-night conversation where he showed her the human beneath the monster. Every moment she saw past the walls he'd built to the grief and loneliness underneath. She was falling for a man she couldn't have, shouldn't want. A man whose world would destroy her if she got too close. But God, when he looked at her, really looked at her. Not through her, she felt seen in a way she hadn't since before Brandon. Maybe even before that. Salvatore saw her strength and her fear, her ambition and her vulnerability. And he didn't ask her to choose between them. He just accepted all of it. Her business was still in shambles. Clients were still leaving. The DoD contract was under review. Everything she'd built was hanging by a thread. By every logical measure, she should be devastated. Focused only on survival and recovery. Instead, she was lying in a safe house in Brooklyn, falling for a man who made her feel alive for the first time in years. The contradiction was maddening. Her brain screamed at her to stop, to recognize this for what it was, trauma bonding, survival instinct misinterpreted as attraction. She was a logical person, a strategic thinker. She built billion-dollar companies by making rational decisions. But her heart didn't care about logic. Her heart only knew that when Salvatore sat across from her at the kitchen table, when his knee accidentally brushed hers, and neither of them moved away, when he smiled at something, Evan said, and the ice in his eyes melted for just a second. That's when she felt whole. She thought about Lucia, the violinist who'd loved Salvatore despite knowing what he was, who'd given him 4 years of something close to normal before tragedy stole it away. Had Lucia felt this same impossible pull, this sense that loving him was dangerous but not loving him was worse? Alara rolled over, pressed her face into the pillow. This was insane. She had a son to protect, a company to save, a life to rebuild. She couldn't afford to fall for someone whose enemies sent armed men to kidnap children, whose world operated on violence and loyalty and codes she didn't understand. But maybe that was exactly why she was falling, because Salvatore understood something she was only beginning to learn. That power wasn't the same as control, that building empires required sacrifice, that sometimes strength meant knowing when to be vulnerable. He'd shown her his grief, his guilt, his humanity. He'd let her see the father behind the mafia boss. And in doing so, he'd made it impossible for her to see him as just a threat or just a protector. She saw him as a man, complicated, damaged, dangerous, but real. And real was what she'd been missing her entire adult life. That terrified her more than any of Vincent's attacks ever could. The next morning, everything changed. Salvatore's tech team had finally traced Vincent's network back to its source. They'd been working for 2 weeks, following digital breadcrumbs through shell companies and encrypted servers. When they found it, when they pulled up the final piece of evidence, Salvatore went very still in a way that made Alara's stomach drop. "What is it?" she asked, watching his expression turn to stone. He didn't answer, just stood, made a phone call in Italian so rapid she couldn't follow it, then grabbed his jacket. "Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in, except my people." "Salvatore, what's happening?" He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "Vincent wasn't working alone. He had help from someone I trusted, someone who's been in my inner circle for 15 years. "Who?" "My cousin Marco." The name hit like a physical blow. Marco, the owner of Aurelio's, the man who'd treated Alara like family, who'd known she'd be at the restaurant that night, who'd had access to Salvatore's schedule, his operations, his vulnerabilities. "Marco's been feeding information to Vincent for 6 months," Salvatore said, his voice deadly calm. "Setting up the power play. He thought if Vincent took over my territory and he controlled the restaurants and legitimate businesses, they could push me out, take Isabella, divide my empire between them." Alara felt sick. "Take Isabella?" "Marco never forgave me for not making him my second after his father died. Said I chose business over family. Now he's chosen revenge over everything." Salvatore's eyes were cold, empty. "I need to handle this. Keep the children inside. My people know to shoot anyone who approaches the house without clearance." He left before she could respond. The door closed with a finality that made Alara's hands shake. 2 hours later, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Monroe," Vincent Rossi's voice. Smooth, confident. "We should talk." Alara's blood turned to ice. "I have nothing to say to you." "Not even about your son's safety? Because right now, Salvatore's across town dealing with Marco, which means you're in that safe house with minimal security. 4 guards, I believe. And my people are already outside." Alara moved to the window, careful not to be seen. 3 black SUVs were parked across the street, men with weapons visible even from a distance. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror. "I want you to walk out that front door with Isabella. Leave your son inside where he'll be safe. Salvatore cares about you now. I've watched it happen, and he cares about his daughter more than his own life. If I have both of you, he'll give me everything. His territory, his contacts, his empire. And then I'll let you all go." "You're lying." "Maybe," Vincent said cheerfully. "But are you willing to bet your son's life on it? Because if you don't come out, I'm coming in. And things will get messy. Children get hurt in crossfire, Miss Monroe. Happens all the time." Alara's mind raced. The guards outside were Salvatore's people, loyal. But Vincent had numbers and firepower. If shooting started, Evan and Isabella were in the middle of it. "I need 5 minutes," she said. "You have 3. Vincent hung up. Alara stood frozen for 10 seconds. Then she moved. Went upstairs, kept her voice calm. "Kids, we're playing a game. A hiding game. Evan, remember that closet in the basement where we found the board games yesterday?" "Yeah," Evan said, confused. "You and Isabella are going to hide there. Don't come out until you hear my voice or Mr. DeLuca's voice saying it's safe. Okay? This is really important." "Mom, you're scaring me," Evan said. "I know, baby, but I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" He nodded, tears already forming. Isabella took his hand. "Come on, I know a good hiding spot. We'll be really quiet. Alara led them to the basement, to the storage closet packed with old furniture and boxes. Get behind those boxes. Don't make any noise. Don't come out for anyone but me or Mr. DeLuca. Promise me. I promise, Evan whispered. I promise too, Isabella said, her voice small. Alara kissed them both, fought back tears, and closed the closet door. Then she went upstairs, walked to the front entrance, and made a choice that would either save them all or destroy everything. She opened the door and stepped outside. Vincent was leaning against one of the SUVs, smiling. Smart woman. Where's Isabella? Inside, hiding. You'll never find her before Salvatore gets back. Vincent's smile faded. That wasn't our deal. Our deal is, I walk out here so you don't hurt my son. I did that. Isabella stays hidden. You want her? You'll have to go through Salvatore. Good luck with that. Vincent pulled out his gun. Or I shoot you right now and go in anyway. Alara lifted her chin. Then Salvatore hunts you to the ends of the earth. Your choice. Vincent stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. You've got guts. I'll give you that. Fine. You're enough leverage. Get in the car. She did. And as they drove away, she prayed Salvatore would forgive her for what she'd just done. For saving his daughter by sacrificing herself? Salvatore knew something was wrong the moment he pulled up to the safe house. The guards were dead. Professional kills. Quick and quiet. Vincent's work. He was inside before his backup arrived. Gun drawn, every sense on high alert. The house was silent. Too silent. He cleared rooms systematically. Kitchen empty. Living room empty. Upstairs, bedrooms empty. Panic started to claw at his throat. Isabella. Evan. Where were they? Then he heard it. A soft sound from the basement. He moved fast, found the storage closet, yanked open the door. Two small faces stared up at him from behind boxes. Isabella. Evan. Alive. Safe. Papa! Isabella launched herself at him. He caught her, held her so tight she squeaked. Where's your mother? He asked Evan, keeping his voice calm despite the terror. She told us to hide. Said we couldn't come out except for you or her. Evan's eyes were red from crying. Men came. I heard cars. Where's my mom? Salvatore's jaw clenched. Alara had hidden the children and gone outside, alone, to face Vincent, to sacrifice herself. He'd never felt rage like this. Cold, focused, absolute. Stay here, he told Isabella and Evan. My people are coming. You'll be safe. He pulled out his phone, made 2 calls, his backup to secure the children, and then another call. To Marco, who answered on the second ring. Salvatore, I can explain. Where is Vincent holding her? Silence. Marco, I will burn everything you love to ash if you don't answer me right now. Where is Vincent holding Alara Monroe? The warehouse, Pier 47. But Salvatore, you need to understand. He hung up, looked at Isabella and Evan. I'm bringing her back. I promise. Don't leave us, Isabella whispered. It was the choice he'd been avoiding his entire life. The impossible math. His daughter needed him here, safe, present. But Alara, God. Alara was in Vincent's hands because she'd saved Isabella, because she'd chosen his daughter over her own safety. He couldn't lose anyone else. He couldn't fail again the way he'd failed Lucia. I'll be back in 2 hours, he said, kissing Isabella's forehead. I promise you, Principessa. 2 hours and we'll all be together. Me, you, Evan, and his mom. Trust me. Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. Be careful, Papa. He left before he could change his mind, before fear could override fury, because the only thing more powerful than his need to protect Isabella was his need to save the woman who'd protected her. The warehouse at Pier 47 was exactly where Marco said it would be. Salvatore could have brought an army, should have brought backup. Instead, he went in alone. because this had to end with him. His choice. His consequences. Vincent was waiting in the center of the warehouse. Alara was zip-tied to a chair, her face bruised, but her eyes fierce. When she saw Salvatore, something like relief flashed across her face, then fear. "Don't," she said. "It's a trap. There are snipers." "I know," Salvatore said calmly. He counted them. 5 positions, all visible if you knew where to look. He'd been doing this for 25 years. Vincent was good, but Salvatore was better. "Here's how this works," Vincent said, gun pointed at Alara's head. "You sign over your territory, your businesses, your contacts, everything, and I let her live. You don't, and she dies right here." Salvatore looked at Alara, really looked at her, and he saw something he recognized. The same choice he was facing. The impossible math. Empire or love, power or humanity. Lucia had asked him once to choose her over the life. He'd said yes, but never really meant it. Never really put her first, and she died because of that choice. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. "Okay," Salvatore said quietly. "You win." Vincent blinked, surprised. "What?" I said, "Okay. You want my empire? Take it. Let her go." "Salvatore, no," Alara said desperately. "Don't do this. Don't give up everything for me." He looked at her, and his expression softened in a way it hadn't in years. "You're not everything, Alara. You're the only thing that matters. The rest is just money and fear. I've had enough of both." He lowered his gun, raised his hands. "Let her go, Vincent. You've won." Vincent smiled. Finally. Salvatore De Luca admitting defeat. This is historic. "Yeah," Salvatore said. "It really is." That's when his snipers fired. 5 shots, 5 kills. Vincent's men dropped before they could react. Vincent himself turned, confused, and Salvatore's gun was already out, already aimed. "The difference between you and me," Salvatore said quietly, "is I know when to choose love over power, and I have people loyal enough to help me do both." He fired once. Vincent fell, clutching his shoulder, not dead but incapacitated. Salvatore crossed to Alara, cut her zip ties, pulled her into his arms. She was shaking, crying, holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. "You came," she whispered. "Always," he said. "I'll always come for you." And for the first time in 15 years, Salvatore De Luca felt like he'd made the right choice. But Vincent wasn't done. The shot had hit his shoulder, spinning him backward. He scrambled for his gun, bleeding, furious. "You think this is over? You think shooting me ends this?" Salvatore kept his gun trained on Vincent but didn't fire again. "No. Killing you is too easy. Too clean." Vincent laughed, a wet, painful sound. "So what? You're going to arrest me? You don't work with cops, Salvatore. You are the criminal here." "Not anymore," a new voice said. Marco stepped out from the shadows at the warehouse entrance, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were federal agents, FBI, at least a dozen of them, vests on, weapons drawn. And at the front was a woman in a dark suit, badge clipped to her belt. "Vincent Rossi, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, attempted murder, and about 40 other charges we're still counting," the agent said. "You have the right to remain silent." Vincent's face went white. He looked at Salvatore, then at Marco, understanding dawning. "You set me up! This whole thing was a setup!" Salvatore lowered his gun. "No, you set yourself up the moment you went after my family. I just made sure there was evidence." "Marco helped us build the case," the FBI agent continued, moving forward to cuff Vincent. "Wore a wire for 3 months. Recorded every conversation, every transaction, every threat you made. You're going away for a very long time, Mr. Rossi." Vincent struggled as they cuffed him, his eyes locked on Salvatore. "You can't do this. You're one of us. You can't work with feds." "I'm not one of you," Salvatore said coldly. "I never was. I built my business. You built a criminal empire on extortion and violence. There's a difference." As the agents hauled Vincent away, Marco approached slowly. His face was haggard, exhausted. "I'm sorry, Sal, for everything, for doubting you, for letting Vincent get close, for almost costing you everything." Salvatore stared at his cousin for a long moment. "You wore a wire. You risked your life to fix this." "It's what family does," Marco said quietly, "even when they screw up first." Salvatore nodded. "Not forgiveness. Not yet. But acknowledgement. We'll talk. Later. Right now, I need to get her somewhere safe." The FBI agent approached Alara, who was still sitting in the chair, processing everything. "Miss Monroe, I'm Agent Sarah Chen. We've been investigating Vincent Rossi's operation for 2 years. Your company's sabotage gave us the opening we needed. We'd like to get your statement, but it can wait until you've received medical attention." "My son," Alara said, her voice hoarse. "Evan, is he safe?" Salvatore assured her, helping her stand. "With Isabella. Protected. I'm taking you to them now." They walked out of the warehouse together, Salvatore's arm around Alara's waist because her legs were unsteady. The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It felt symbolic, an ending and a beginning. In the car, Alara finally spoke. "You planned this, the whole thing, working with the FBI." "Not the whole thing," Salvatore admitted, driving carefully. "I didn't plan to care about you. That part was unintentional. But yes, when I realized Vincent was moving against me, I needed a way to stop him that didn't start a war. Marco came to me 3 months ago, told me Vincent had approached him about turning. We decided to use it. Let Vincent think Marco was on his side, while Marco gathered evidence." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was. And because I needed Vincent to believe he was winning, needed him to escalate, to make mistakes, to expose everyone working with him." Alara was quiet, processing. "You used me as bait." "No," Salvatore said firmly. "I protected you while using Vincent's attack on you to build a case. There's a difference." "Is there?" Alara asked, and there was an edge to her voice now. Anger. Betrayal. "You knew I was being sabotaged. You could have stopped it immediately. Instead, you let it continue so you could gather evidence. My company almost died, Salvatore. My son was traumatized. I was beaten and kidnapped. Also, you could build a legal case instead of just killing Vincent like you've killed everyone else who crossed you." Salvatore's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You're right. I made a choice. I chose a path that didn't involve more violence. That didn't make Isabella watch her father become more of a monster. That didn't put you in a position of being complicit in murder. I thought I was protecting everyone. Maybe I was wrong." Alara closed her eyes. She was exhausted, hurt, confused, grateful and furious in equal measure. "I don't know how to feel about you right now." "That's fair," Salvatore said quietly. "Take all the time you need to figure it out." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the safe house, now surrounded by actual FBI protection, in addition to Salvatore's people, Evan and Isabella came running out. Evan crashed into Alara so hard they both nearly fell. She held him, breathed in the scent of his hair, felt his tears soaking her shirt. "You're okay," he kept saying. "You're okay. You're okay." "I'm okay, baby," Alara whispered. "I'm here. I'm safe." Isabella wrapped her arms around Salvatore's waist. "You kept your promise, Papa." 2 hours. 2 hours and 17 minutes, Salvatore corrected gently. "I'm sorry I was late." "It's okay," Isabella said. "You came back. That's what matters." Alara looked at Salvatore over their children's heads. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw everything. The calculation and the care, the ruthlessness and the love, the monster and the man. She didn't know if she could forgive him for the choices he'd made, but she understood why he'd made them. And maybe Eventually, that would be enough. The next 6 weeks were chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. The FBI needed statements from both Alara and Salvatore. The media caught wind of the story, billionaire tech CEO caught in mafia power struggle, and Alara's phone rang non-stop with interview requests she ignored. Vincent's arrest led to a cascade of other arrests. His network unraveled fast once people started cooperating to save themselves. Alara's company stabilized. Slowly, painfully, but it stabilized. The clients who'd fled started asking questions about coming back. The DoD contract was reinstated after a thorough security review. Her board of directors, who'd been quietly discussing replacing her, suddenly remembered why they'd backed her in the first place. Monroe Technologies wasn't dead. It was wounded, but it would survive. Salvatore's empire changed shape. With Vincent gone and Marco's betrayal exposed, then forgiven, Salvatore made a decision. He started divesting from the operations that lived in gray areas. Kept the legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, investments, and quietly exited the rest. It cost him power, cost him respect in certain circles, but it bought him something more valuable: distance. Separation from the life that had killed Lucia and nearly killed everything he loved. His lawyer called it strategic restructuring. Salvatore called it choosing a future where Isabella doesn't grow up visiting her father in prison. Alara and Evan moved back to their penthouse, but not before Salvatore installed security that would make the Secret Service jealous. She argued it was excessive. He argued she'd been kidnapped 6 weeks ago. They compromised on excessive security that was slightly less visible. They saw each other often. Coffee meetings that turned into lunch meetings that turned into dinners, always with the children present, always appropriate, always careful. Because neither of them knew exactly what they were to each other anymore. Allies? Friends? Something more that neither was ready to name? One night, 3 weeks after Vincent's arrest, Alara showed up at Salvatore's townhouse without calling first. He answered the door in jeans and a t-shirt, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about what you did. Letting my company suffer to build a case against Vincent. Using me as bait even though you never asked if I was willing." Salvatore's expression went carefully neutral. And I'm still angry about it. I might be angry about it for a while. That's fair. But I also understand why you did it. You were trying to end it without more violence. Trying to protect everyone, including me. You made the best choice you could with impossible options. "I could have done better," Salvatore said. "Could have told you earlier. Trusted you with the plan." "Yeah," Alara agreed. "You could have. And next time, you will. Because that's the deal. If we're going to be in each other's lives, and I think we are, then we trust each other. Completely. No secrets. No protecting me from information you think I can't handle. I'm not fragile, Salvatore. I'm a billionaire who survived a mafia power struggle. I can handle truth." Salvatore smiled slightly. "Deal." "Good." Alara stepped closer. "Now that we have that settled, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay." "That night at the warehouse, when you told Vincent you'd give up everything for me, did you mean it, or was it part of the plan?" Salvatore looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I meant every word. The plan was to have my snipers take out his men. The choice to prioritize you over my empire, that was real. That was me choosing differently than I've ever chosen before." Alara's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you make me want to be someone Isabella can be proud of. Someone who doesn't just survive, but actually lives. Someone who knows the difference between power and love, and chooses love even when it costs everything." Alara kissed him. Soft, careful, a question and an answer at the same time. When they pulled apart, Salvatore was smiling. "So," he said, "what now?" "Now?" Alara smiled back. Now we figure it out. Together. 6 months later, everything looked different. Better in some ways, complicated in others. Real. But that's a story for tomorrow. For now, all that mattered was this. Two broken people had found each other in the worst possible circumstances. And instead of destroying each other, they'd chosen to build something new. Something honest. Something worth fighting for. The question was, could they make it last? 6 months later, everything looked different. Better in some ways, complicated in others, real. Monroe Technologies had recovered. More than recovered, it was thriving. The publicity from the Vincent Rossi case had actually helped once the full story came out. People loved a survivor narrative. Alara had done 3 major interviews, carefully framed to focus on corporate sabotage and resilience rather than organized crime. Her company's stock had hit an all-time high. She'd hired a new security team, expanded into 3 new markets, and promoted 2 of her senior engineers to executive positions. But she'd also made changes. She worked fewer hours, turned off her phone at dinner, made every one of Evan's soccer games. Because she'd learned something in those terrifying weeks hiding in Salvatore's safe house. Success without presence was just another kind of failure. Evan was doing better. The nightmares had faded. He saw a therapist twice a week who specialized in childhood trauma, and it was helping. He laughed more now, played harder, and he developed an unexpected friendship with Isabella that had only grown stronger. The kids did sleepovers at each other's houses, built science projects together, argued about which superhero was strongest. They were just kids, finding normal in a situation that was anything but. Salvatore had restructured his entire life. The businesses he'd kept were completely legitimate now. He'd even started consulting for the FBI, anonymously on organized crime cases, using his knowledge of how criminal enterprises worked to help take them down. It was strange, uncomfortable sometimes, but it felt right. He and Marco had rebuilt their relationship slowly. Trust had to be re-earned on both sides. But family was family, and they were figuring it out. And then there was Alara. What they had wasn't simple. Couldn't be defined by any conventional label. They weren't dating in the traditional sense. There were no fancy restaurants or formal dates. But they were together, building something careful and honest and real. They had dinner together 3 nights a week, alternating houses. The kids would play while Alara and Salvatore cooked, talked, argued about everything from politics to parenting. They'd perfected a rhythm, a partnership that felt both new and ancient. Some nights after the children were asleep, they'd sit on the couch and just be quiet together. Salvatore reading case files, Alara reviewing code, comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. They hadn't rushed the physical side. Both had too much history, too many scars. The first time Salvatore kissed her, really kissed her, not the desperate reunion kiss at the warehouse, was 3 months after Vincent's arrest. They'd been in his kitchen, doing dishes, and he just turned to her and asked, "Can I kiss you?" The asking mattered. The gentleness mattered. Everything about it mattered. They took it slow, built trust before passion, made sure the foundation was solid before constructing anything else on top of it. It wasn't a romance movie. It was better. It was real. On a Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the warehouse, all 4 of them went to Central Park. Evan and Isabella ran ahead, chasing each other around trees, laughing. Alara and Salvatore walked behind, hands linked, watching them. "Do you ever think about what we'd tell people?" Alara asked. "I mean, if someone asks how we met, what do we say?" Salvatore smiled. "We tell them the truth. We met at a restaurant. Our kids became friends. We discovered we had more in common than we expected." "You're leaving out some key details." "I'm simplifying. That's allowed." Alara laughed. "I suppose it is." Isabella fell, scraped her knee. Before either adult could react, Evan was there helping her up, checking if she was okay. They watched their children care for each other, and something passed between Alara and Salvatore. Recognition, pride, hope. "I never thought I'd have this," Salvatore said quietly. After Lucia died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd just be a father and a businessman and nothing more. I didn't think I deserved more. Do you think you deserve it now? Alara asked. I don't know, Salvatore admitted, but I'm grateful for it anyway. Good answer, Alara said. They stood there watching their children play. Two people who'd been broken by their pasts, who'd survived impossible situations, who'd chosen each other not despite their complications, but because of them. They understood each other, the ambition, the fear, the fierce protectiveness, the loneliness of power, the cost of survival. This wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after, because life didn't work that way. There were just days, some good, some hard, most somewhere in between. And the choice to keep showing up, keep choosing each other, keep building something honest. So, what do we do now? Alara asked. Salvatore squeezed her hand. We keep going, keep building, keep choosing this. This? Us. Whatever that means. However it looks. Alara smiled. I can do that. Yeah, Salvatore said, pulling her closer. Me too. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt less like a threat and more like a promise. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real was enough. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Alara and Salvatore sat on his rooftop terrace. The city stretched out below them, a million lights against the darkness, 2 glasses of wine. A blanket wrapped around them against the autumn chill. Can I tell you something? Alara said quietly. Always. That night at the warehouse, when you said I was the only thing that mattered, I didn't believe you at first. I thought it was part of the plan. Another manipulation. Another move in whatever game you were playing. Salvatore didn't interrupt, just listened. But then I saw your face when you found Evan and Isabella in that closet. The way you held them. The way you promised to bring me back even though it meant leaving them. And I realized you weren't playing. You'd made a choice. A real choice. She turned to look at him. You chose me over everything you'd built. Everything you'd protected. Your entire empire. And that terrified me more than Vincent ever did. Why? Salvatore asked. Because it meant I had to choose too. And I'd spent my whole adult life building walls to avoid exactly that kind of vulnerability. After Brandon, after the divorce, I told myself I'd never need anyone again. That I'd be self-sufficient, independent, strong. She took a breath. But strength isn't the same as armor. And independence isn't the same as isolation. You taught me that. By being vulnerable first. By choosing love, even when it cost you everything. Salvatore set down his wine glass and took her hand. You want to know what I learned? Tell me. I learned that power without purpose is just control. And control without connection is just loneliness dressed up as strength. I spent 15 years after Lucia died building walls so high nothing could touch me. And all I built was a prison. He looked at her. Really looked at her. You didn't break down my walls, Alara. You showed me there was a door. And you waited while I decided whether to walk through it. And did you? Alara asked. Walk through it? Every day, Salvatore said. Every single day, I choose to walk through it. To be present. To be vulnerable. To risk loving someone again even though I know how much it can hurt. Are you scared? Terrified, he admitted. Every time you leave, I wonder if you'll come back. Every time Evan and Isabella play together, I think about what would happen if this fell apart. Every time I look at you, I remember that the world is cruel and unpredictable and nothing is guaranteed. He pulled her closer. But I'm more scared of the alternative, going back to that prison, living half a life because I'm too afraid to risk a whole one. Isabella deserves better than that. You deserve better than that. And maybe, just maybe, I deserve better than that too. Alara rested her head on his shoulder. We're quite a pair, aren't we? A billionaire who built an empire to prove she didn't need anyone? And a mafia boss who built an empire to protect everyone except himself. Reformed mafia boss, Salvatore corrected with a slight smile. Reformed. Alara agreed. Is that what we're calling it? Consultant to federal law enforcement sounds better on a resume. She laughed. Actually laughed. And it felt good. Easy. Normal. I love you, she said suddenly. The words just came out. Unplanned. Unfiltered. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first night at the restaurant. Maybe when you crashed through the window to save us. Maybe when you let Isabella braid your hair while pretending to be tough. But it happened, and I'm done pretending it didn't. Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. Then, I love you too, and it terrifies me. But not enough to stop. Not enough to stop, Alara echoed. They sat there in the quiet, the city humming below them. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to build something in the light. It wouldn't always be easy. There would be hard days, moments of doubt, times when their past tried to pull them backward. But they'd face it together, with honesty, with vulnerability, with the kind of strength that came from choosing love even when it was inconvenient or scary or completely illogical. Because that was the thing about love. It wasn't logical, it wasn't safe, it wasn't predictable, but it was real, and real was all that mattered. So that's the story. A billionaire and a mafia boss. Two people who shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Two families built from broken pieces into something whole. But here's what I want you to think about. This story isn't really about romance, or danger, or even survival. It's about choice. Every single person in this story had to choose. Alara choosing to trust when trust had betrayed her before. Salvatore choosing love over power when power was all he'd known. The children choosing friendship in the middle of chaos. Even Vincent and Marco making choices that define them. We all face impossible choices. Maybe not mafia bosses and corporate sabotage, but choices that matter. Stay or go. Fight or surrender. Build walls or tear them down. Trust or protect. Love or survive. What would you have done in Alara's place? Would you have taken Salvatore's hand that first night? Would you have trusted a man whose world ran on violence? Would you have made a deal with someone who could destroy you as easily as save you? Or what about Salvatore? Would you have given up your empire for someone you barely knew? Would you have chosen differently than you'd chosen your entire life? Would you have let love in when love had already cost you everything once? Here's what I learned writing this story. Power isn't about control. It's about choice. The choice to be vulnerable. The choice to trust. The choice to build instead of protect. The choice to live instead of just survive. Alara could have run that first night at the restaurant. She chose to stay. Salvatore could have let Vincent destroy her and eliminate a problem. He chose to help. They both could have walked away after Vincent was arrested, built their separate empires, kept their walls intact. They chose each other instead. And that choice, that simple, terrifying, beautiful choice, changed everything. Because here's the truth. Nobody tells you about power. Real power isn't making people fear you. It's making them believe in you. Real strength isn't building walls. It's knowing when to let someone in. Real success isn't empire building. It's finding someone who sees your empire and still chooses to see you. Alara built a billion-dollar company, but her real achievement was learning to trust again. Salvatore controlled half of New York, but his real victory was learning to love again. And together they built something stronger than either empire. A family, a partnership, a future. So I'm going to ask you again, what would you choose? Would you choose power or connection? Control or vulnerability? Protection or trust? The empire or the person standing in front of you asking you to be brave? Drop a comment. Tell me your answer. Tell me what you learned. Tell me if this story changed how you think about power and trust and the space between right and wrong. Because here's what I know for sure. Every one of us is one choice away from a completely different life. One moment of courage, one decision to trust, one leap of faith. Alara made that choice walking into a restaurant. Salvatore made that choice crashing through a window. When will you make yours? And if you made it this far, if you watched this entire journey from beginning to end, if you felt something, hope, fear, recognition, possibility, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, stories about real people making impossible choices, are what we do here. Stories about finding light in darkness, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about choosing love even when it's terrifying. You don't want to miss what comes next. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. Thank you for believing that even broken people can build something beautiful. Until next time, remember this. You are one choice away from everything changing. The only question is whether you're brave enough to make it. The restaurant was called Aurelio's, the same place where it all began. Marco had insisted on hosting, his way of making amends. Private dining room, just 6 people. Alara, Salvatore, Evan, Isabella, Marco, and agent Sarah Chen, who'd become an unexpected friend through the whole ordeal. Evan and Isabella were at the kids' table, attempting to teach Marco how to fold origami cranes. He was terrible at it. They were laughing at his lopsided attempts. "I still can't believe you arrested a guy using evidence from a mafia boss," Marco said to Agent Chen. "Reformed consultant," Salvatore corrected. Right. Reformed. Marco grinned. "Anyway, Chen, how does that even work in court?" "Very carefully," Agent Chen said with a smile. "But it worked. Vincent's serving 20 years. His entire network dismantled. And your cousin is helping us with 3 other cases." "Strange world we live in," Alara said, leaning into Salvatore's side. "Strange," Salvatore agreed. "But not bad." Alara looked around the table, at Evan showing Isabella a new trick, at Marco finally getting a wing fold right, at Agent Chen laughing at something completely ordinary, at Salvatore's hand resting on hers, solid and real. This wasn't the life she'd planned, wasn't the empire she'd envisioned, wasn't the story she'd thought she was writing. It was better, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can build the biggest empire in the world, but if you build it alone, you're just building a prettier prison. The real empire, the one that mattered, was built on trust, on love, on the courage to be vulnerable, on choosing connection over control, on the messy, complicated, beautiful act of letting people in. "What are you thinking about?" Salvatore asked quietly. "That I'd do it all again," Alara said. "Every terrifying moment, every impossible choice, all of it." "Me too," Salvatore said. "Even the part where Vincent kidnapped me? Especially that part. It's when I knew for sure." "Knew what?" "That you were worth more than any empire I'd ever built." Alara kissed him. Right there in the restaurant where it all began, where 2 worlds collided and somehow, impossibly, found a way to become one. "Happy anniversary," she whispered. "Happy anniversary," he said back. 1 year since the night that changed everything. 1 year since a billionaire took her son to dinner and met the man who would teach her that the only thing more powerful than an empire was the courage to love. Not happily ever after, but happily, right now, together. And that was enough. That was everything.